The Xiaomi Redmi 13. Why did I say, you might wonder? Well, the Redmi 13 is an interesting phone, but at the same time, it might not meet your expectations. Not to be confused with the Redmi 13C, but this is intended as a better phone. Although I'd argue the 13C has a better looking design. The design on the Redmi 13 we've seen way too much in the last 2 years. We can barely even tell these budget phones apart. Itel, Tecno, Infinix, Redmi, you name it. But let's focus on what we have right here, the Redmi 13. Priced at around $140 for the base version with 6 gigs of RAM. In Naira, that's just under 200k. There's an 8GB RAM option, also a 256GB memory option. It's good to see we are finally leaving behind 64GB memory phones. Nothing has changed with the unboxing experience here. You're getting the same packaging as the Redmi 13C with that red box, which contains just the essential accessories except earphones. Now, putting aside the fact that the Redmi 13 carries an all too familiar design, it actually remains a fine phone, especially if you are going for the more distinct color options like the one I have here. Pink. It's pink, but hear me out. It looks great. Now, this is pretty much the same design as the Redmi 12, except that the camera and flash rings are smaller on the 12, and I'd say it looks a lot better. These ones are bigger and it looks a lot more like the Transsion phones, of which Transsion is actually already leaving this design behind. But let's move on. Xiaomi also maintains the glossy glass back. Now, on the display is Corning Gorilla Glass. As is common with Xiaomi phones, we have the headphone jack at the top. Now, some prefer it at the bottom, but the most important thing is that it is present here, and so is the fan favorite R Blaster. Now, one thing I think Xiaomi still needs to bring to this end of their budget phones is stereo speakers. I can mention at least 3 from the competition that offers this even on lower priced devices. But that's not a deal breaker for this price point. It would have been nice to have it though. For those wondering if this is any different from the Redmi 13C, as a matter of fact it is, and I'll just go on to list where it offers better. This has better resolution display and a more recent processor, faster charging, also better camera specifications. As for how it fares compared to its predecessor, the Redmi 12, while they are similar in most areas, it has an upgraded processor, faster charging, higher main and selfie cameras, and an absent ultra-wide camera. But we'll talk about that later. The Redmi 12 has an ultra-wide. Also, the base version of the Redmi 13 has 6 gigs of RAM. We had a 4GB option with the Redmi 12 if I remember correctly. Now that you've seen just how it compares to the 13C and 12, it's time we keep all the focus on this one. On the display, you are looking at a 90Hz LCD panel with 1080p resolution. It's actually a tall one at 6.79 inches in size. I find it interesting that in this price range of devices at the moment, only Samsung has one with an AMOLED display. That is the Galaxy A15. Interesting times, but let's move on. The fingerprint scanner here, as expected, is on the power button on the side, and it's actually a responsive one, quite responsive. Now, as mentioned earlier, the display has Gorilla Glass protection. On the software, we get Android 14 and HyperOS. Now, this is one of the areas I think the Redmi 13 is underwhelming or below expectations. But first, let's start with the good stuff. HyperOS, Xiaomi's upgrade from MIUI. It's lighter, gives you more control over the bloatware, improved UI overall. It's also great that you're getting the latest Android version here and potential 2 years of OS upgrades, I believe. Now, the complaints. The bloatware here is plenty. Like, it's a lot. Probably the most I've seen on any Redmi phone. Probably. Now, thankfully, most of it can be uninstalled. And then we have the ads problem. Not just from the app sending notifications, but within the UI too. Come on, Xiaomi. I just want to be able to change my wallpaper without having to see ads. In their defense though, it is a budget phone. Drawbacks are inevitable at this price point, but it really could be better. There's also the fact that on this end of the budget, you lose some HyperOS features. Pop-up multitasking, fewer options for the lock screen customization, no sidebar, no split screen. Basically, multitasking is limited here. Also, no second space. I had the impression that only the 4GB versions of Redmi phones don't get second space because of less RAM. But I have the 6GB version of the Redmi 13 here and there is no second space option. Maybe the 8GB version will have it. I can't confirm that at the moment. If you have the 8GB version and you have second space, let us know. Although if you have the budget for the 8GB version, the Redmi Note 13 is actually a better option because it falls in that price range and you will get better version of the software, HyperOS that is. Also, there is some lag within the software on the Redmi 13. Now after the phone stays idle for a while, it takes some time to get up to speed. It sort of responds slowly to actions. Basically, you don't pick this up and expect too much from it. Now I believe the lags can be fixed with a software update. Hopefully Xiaomi attends to that soon enough. Now the fact that we are getting 6 gigs of RAM as the base option here is commendable because the 4 gig version of the Redmi 12 was a mess when it comes to lags. Now let's talk about its performance aside the software. We get the MediaTek Helio G91 Ultra. We first saw this processor on Intel's S24, which was released earlier this year. The G91 Ultra is still a 12nm processor. You could say it's an upgrade to the G88, but it's not by a lot. It just supports the use of higher megapixel camera. That explains the 108 megapixel camera upgrade we get here. Performance in other aspects is mostly similar. I'd argue that this is not a phone meant for someone using the Redmi 12 because it's not much of an upgrade. For the average smartphone user, the Redmi 13 handles itself just fine. When the software is not having the occasional delay, it works well to handle most of what you throw at it. For a budget phone, that is. It does okay if you want to game a little. Now it's not the best at gaming for its price point, but it will do just fine. I loaded Call of Duty Warzone Mobile on it, and while it didn't give me smooth or lag-free gameplay, it ran the game. Not the kind of game I'll recommend playing on a device like this, but it is just to show that if it can run this, which is a highly demanding game, it will do better with the more optimized game. Of course, on low graphics. Now, one thing I can't complain about the Redmi 13 is its battery life. It will handle your expectations of a 5000 mAh battery, actually 5030 mAh battery. It's also great that we now have 33 watts fast charging here, which is an improvement from the 18 watts we got on the Redmi 12. Now, cameras. Since we're getting bigger camera rings, it won't be out of place to have higher expectations. As I already mentioned, we are getting an upgraded 108 megapixel main camera and 13 megapixels for its selfie camera. The ultra wide from the Redmi 12 is absent here. We are left with the 2 megapixel macro camera. And where I noticed the most improvement is in the selfie camera. The results are sharp and a lot better than the typical overly smooth selfies. Although I turned off the default beauty filters, this is better processing. But HDR is apparently absent when you select portrait mode. On the rear cameras, the results are also great. I have nothing to complain about here, although they should have kept the ultra-wide camera. It doesn't shoot 108 megapixels by default, so if you want that, you'll need to enable it. But I'd say you get the most balanced results with the default mode. Selecting 108 megapixel mode will prioritize the details over everything else, and it's best to use that only in the perfect lighting conditions. The Redmi 13 can only shoot videos at a max 1080p 30 frames per second from both selfie and rear cameras. That is expected, and I'll say it does pretty good for a budget phone. The Redmi 13 is decent, however the software might not meet your expectations because of those lags. It feels like HyperOS still needs some optimization here. For its price, you have the option of Intel's RS4 with a better Helio G99, although that has a 720p display, which might be a deal breaker. You could also consider the Galaxy A15 or Tecno's Pova 6 Neo if your budget can go slightly higher. Oh, we're done here. That's pretty much all I have on the Redmi 13. Peace.